All right. Good afternoon, everyone. It is exactly 2 o'clock Eastern on the dot, and so that being said, we'll go ahead and begin with today's webinar. So again, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Empowering Transitioning Youth. This webinar is brought to you by our colleagues at the Federal Trade Commission. My name is William Moore, and I am with the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention's National Training and Technical Assistance Center, also known as NTTAC. And as your technical host, I would like to take a couple of minutes to discuss a few features of Adobe Connect to keep in mind. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be published on NTTAC's YouTube page. The webinar recording will be archived on NTTAC's YouTube channel, where you can also view past webinars, and for the event transcript or even supporting materials, please contact the OJJDP NTTAC Help Desk. For those wishing to download a copy of the PowerPoint slides and other important documents, you may do so by locating the handouts pod directly above the pod. Here, you will also find an FAQ for webinar participants that will likely address any technical related questions. Simply click on the name of the file and click the download button. During today's webinar, presenters will address questions during our Q&A segment. Please type your questions into the chat box as they arise. For those of you participating in today's webinar as a group, please take a couple of minutes to help us count. Go to the chat window and type in the total number of additional people in the room with you today. If you are viewing alone, there is no need to type anything at this time. And I'll give folks just a couple of seconds to do that. Again, type in the total number of additional people in the room with you today. If you are viewing alone, there is no need to type anything at this time. Following today's webinar, attendees will be sent a certificate of attendance. This certificate is sent approximately 1 hour following the conclusion of the event and then via an Adobe Connect thank you email. Please keep an eye on your email for your certificate. Please note that only participants are registered and signed in will receive a certificate of attendance. At the conclusion of today's webinar, you will be provided with a link to a brief evaluation about today's presentation. The feedback you provide is used to assist in future planning and training. Today's presenters include Lisa Schifferly, attorney with the Federal Trade Commission, and Lisa Lake, consumer education specialist with the Federal Trade Commission. I will now turn the webinar over to Lisa Lake for today's presentation.
Thank you so much, William. Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you are. My name, again, is Lisa Lake. As a consumer education specialist here, my job and Lisa's job is to provide information for you to help the people that you serve prevent fraud and scams. So I'm happy to do that, and in that spirit, I've provided my email and phone number for you in case you have any follow-up questions for me after this webinar. Okay, so today we're going to go over the free materials and websites that we have. A lot of our materials, as you'll find out a little later, I'm going to get into the Spanish, or it's almost a one-to-one ratio of English and Spanish. So that means that pretty much anything, any page you go to or any publication you want, more than likely we will have it also in Spanish. We're also going to cover, my colleague is going to cover background checks, tell you a lot about the new credit laws and what you need to know to tell the people that you serve, as well as easy to use consumer resources We're also going to make sure that you know how to tell us about fraud and scams in your community and to report those to the FTC. And we're doing that, by the way, that helps us investigate and potentially bring some of these bad players and scammers to justice. And with that said, a little bit about the FTC. We are an independent law enforcement agency. So we're not cops per se. We are a body of people who can bring bring lawsuits to people against people who have scammed or defrauded folks or have been dishonest in any other ways in their promotion, marketing of their products and their advertising practices. And that's where we have broad jurisdiction. And our mission, again, is to, in addition to shutting down these scams and these practices that affect people, we're about consumer and business education to help people in small businesses and big businesses understand how to protect people and themselves from scams and fraud. And that also includes, for especially businesses, avoiding data breaches, how to protect consumer information, your customer information, their privacy, as well as, for consumers, a whole gamut of things in terms of arming yourself against this, what you can do if it's already happened. We also create materials that educate people in this effect. So again, there's printed and online materials that you can instantly download, right after this call. And we rely on partners like you and the OJJDP to get the word out about these. I mean, these are free government resources. You don't have to pay a dime for them, even when you order them from the bulk order site, which I'll talk about later. But they cost nothing, even the shipping. And they can enhance whatever you're doing with your individual clients, your piece in it. You can brand them, say, with, your offices and with OJJDP, with your own organization, and you can use them in any other communication that you have because the information is copyright free. And to that said, we do, again, provide all this information on scams and fraud, and to stay up to date with those, please subscribe to our blog post. We'll have information about that later in the presentation. Take advantage of the free materials through the bulk order site and download them. And please spread out the partnership opportunities. If you get things from us, good content from us that you want to share with others in your network, we highly encourage that. You can quote the FTC, or you don't have to. Again, you can adopt the information and adapt it to your own communications goals. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Lisa Schifferle.
Thanks so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Lisa Schifferle. I'm an attorney in the Division of Consumer and Business Education, where I work with Lisa Lake. I'm also the FTC's Identity Theft Program Manager. So I'm going to talk with you about some of the resources that we have at the FTC that can help the youth that you work with as they head out on their own, whether they're looking for a job, renting an apartment, or maybe they're just looking for help in terms of budgeting, credit, and avoiding scams. So in particular, I'm going to start out talking about our background check materials and then about the new credit law and some other resources we have on identity theft and budgeting and scam prevention. So let's start with the background check materials. When can background checks be done, and what can be asked, and what do you have to tell? Those are big questions that a lot of people have, and that may pose challenges for youth as they're asked about their medical background, their criminal background, or their credit background. So the FTC has put together a brochure, which I'll show you, that's available at ftc.gov/bulkorder, and I'll tell you a little bit about what you'll find out in that brochure. The big question that people often have is, can employers even require a background check? Is that allowed? And the answer is yes, they are allowed to require a background check, but there are certain things they cannot do. Like they cannot ask about medical information until after you're given a job offer. They also can't ask for genetic information except for in very limited circumstances. And they can't treat you differently because you're part of a protected class like a specific race or national origin or color, gender, religion, and age if you're over 40, which is not going to apply to the youth that we're talking about today. But for example, what we're talking about here is like you can't only run background checks on people of a certain race. So if you found out that an employer was only running background checks on a certain race, that would be most likely discriminatory. And if you find out something like that, the thing to do is to file the complaint with the EEOC, or the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. They're the one that addresses that. But if a youth is coming to you and saying, I applied for this job and I was asked to do a background check, is that allowed? Yes, it is allowed. And people often ask, do I have to do the background check? You don't have to do the background check, but then the employer doesn't have to consider you for employment. So it's a choice to make. Now, what are some of the other requirements on employers? Before they do a background check, they have to provide notice that they're going to give a background check, and it has to be a standalone written notice, so it has to be a separate document. They can't just bury it in a long list of things. They have to give that to the applicant and get the applicant's written consent. So the idea is that they can't just run a background check on you, deny you the job, and you don't know why you were denied. You have to have notice that this background check is going to be provided, and then you have that decision whether you want to do it or not. And as I said, you don't have to consent, but if you don't consent, then they may not give you the job. Another thing that employers are required to do is if they take any, what we call an adverse action, which is basically any kind of negative thing like refusing to hire you or refusing to promote you, if they take any sort of adverse action based on your background check, even if they're thinking they might do that, first they have to give you a copy of your report and give you a copy of your summary of rights, because we know that some background checks have mistakes in them, and so if someone sees a mistake, they should ask the background check company to correct it and send a corrected report to the employer. Now, we also know that sometimes there are things in people's background that are not mistakes, but that may be barriers to employment. So that's a separate challenge that you may need to work with the youth on in terms of looking at the state's expungement laws and seeing if it's a credit-related thing, if they can improve their credit. And one big tip we do have is to have a young person, or really anyone of any age, get your credit report and check your criminal history before applying for a job, so you're not surprised when you get this notice that someone might take an adverse action. That way, if there are mistakes, you can clean things up. But if someone hasn't done that and the employer is going to refuse to hire, they do have to give this pre-adverse action notice, and then they have to give a second notice. If they actually deny employment based on the background check, they have to give a second notice. It's called the adverse action notice. And in that notice, they have to give the contact information for the credit reporting agency that provided the report, and a statement that it was not the credit reporting agency that took the action, it was the employer that did. And then again, they have to give you notice of your right to dispute the accuracy and to get another copy of your report within 60 days. So all of this guidance we've put together in a publication that we call Background Checks, Tips for Job Applicants and Employees. And we worked with the EEOC on this. So it has all this information about when can an employer do the background check, what they can ask, and what steps they have to take before they use it or before they do anything negative based on it. Again, this is available at ftc.gov/bulkorder, which is a great way to get these and hand these out to the youth that you work with so they can be prepared before they apply for a job. And again, do remind them to check their credit and their criminal history before applying for jobs so they can clean up any mistakes ahead of time. Now, the second thing I want to talk about is a new credit law. Credit may be a big issue for people coming out, any young person getting credit, improving their credit, making sure that their credit is not a barrier to employment or housing or other things. So there are new laws. There's a new law that went into effect last September that gave new credit rights to everyone across the country. And some of those big new rights are, first, fraud alerts now last 1 year rather than 90 days. And now credit freezes are free for anyone across the country. They used to be, it used to depend on state law whether it was free or not. Now there's a national law that preempts those state laws so that anyone in the country can get a free credit freeze. And that includes youth under the age of 16, as well as anyone over the age of 16. It also includes incapacitated adults, meaning someone who is under a guardianship or power of attorney of someone else, then the guardian or power of attorney can get the freeze for that individual. One other thing to note is there will be free credit monitoring for active duty military personnel starting May 24th of this year. And if people want to take advantage of these rights, which I'll explain in a little more detail in a minute, they can go to Theft.gov/credit bureau contacts. Again, that's Theft.gov/credit bureau contacts. That's the place that has all of the phone numbers and URLs to get a fraud alert or credit freeze and exercise your rights under the new credit law. So in case people aren't familiar with fraud alerts and credit freezes, basically what a fraud alert is it requires creditors to take steps to verify your identity. So if somebody is out trying to take out a new credit card at Best Buy, they'll give you a call and say, hey, is this you at Best Buy trying to take out a new credit card? And you can say yes or no. In order to place the fraud alert, you need to contact one of the three credit reporting agencies. That's Equifax, Experian, or TransUnion, and they have to contact the other two. And the new thing under the new law is that the fraud alert is now good for 1 year, and anyone can get it. You don't have to be an ID theft victim to get the fraud alert. So anyone can put it on, and it is a good fraud prevention mechanism to have in place. There's also something called an extended fraud alert. So if you know a young person who's been the victim of identity theft, they are entitled to a fraud alert which lasts 7 years. They just have to present an identity theft report, which they can get at identitytheft.gov. And that's all free. And it's also a very easy website, as you'll see later on in the presentation. Makes it easy for people to get that identity theft report. Now, another new law, or another new part of the new credit law, has to do with credit freezes. And credit freeze basically restricts access to your credit file, which makes it harder for identity thieves to take out new accounts. The thing that people need to understand about it, and often don't understand about it, is it restricts access to the credit file not only for other people, but also for yourself. So if you're about to take out new credit, you're going to have to unfreeze the account in order for people to check your credit. So depending on a young person's situation, or may not be a good tool for them if they're about to take out new credit. Again, the new law makes it free throughout the country, and the contacts for doing it are at identitytheft.gov/credit bureau contacts. If someone does want to place a credit freeze, you have to contact each of the credit reporting agencies, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion individually. It's not like the fraud alert, you can just contact one and then contact the other two. For the freeze, you have to contact each one individually each time you place it and each time you lift it. The nice thing about the new law is, in addition to making credit freezes free, it also makes the time frame shorter so that they're more nimble and really a better tool for consumers. So that under the new law, if you place a credit freeze online or by phone, it has to be placed no later than 1 business day after the request. And if you lift it online or by phone, it has to be done within 1 hour, so that if you are at a car dealership applying for a loan, You don't have to go back 3 days later. They are supposed to lift it within an hour so that you can have access to that credit information for your own purposes. And then you can put it back on as well, either online or by phone. If you do it by mail, the credit reporting agencies have a little more time. They have 3 business days to place or lift the credit freeze. But again, it's a good new protective tool for consumers to protect their credit. Another tool, in case you're working with any youth who decide to go into the military or who maybe already are in the military, there's 2 tools for military. One that's already in existence, which is the active duty alert, which is if someone's on active duty, they can put a fraud alert on it lasts a year, but they can extend it for the period of deployment. The nice thing about it, as opposed to the regular fraud alert, is it also opts them out from certain pre-screened offers so that they aren't getting offers that may lead them down the road to choices that they might regret later in terms of credit. And then, as I mentioned before, another aspect of the new credit law that will take effect in May of this year is free online credit monitoring for active duty military. So they'll be entitled to go online and get that free credit monitoring. Another tool, and all this is available in a publication that we have, Identity Theft for Military Personnel and Families, What to Know and What to Do. We also have an identity theft brochure that focuses on child identity theft, because identity theft is slightly different if someone's under the age of 18 or 16. As you saw from the earlier slides, the new law provides for free credit freezes for children under 16. To get that, a parent or guardian has to show proof of authority, like a birth certificate or adoption certificate, or if the kid is in foster care, then a letter from the Child Welfare Agency on agency letterhead. After age 16, the individual can request to place or lift the freeze himself or herself. Another thing to know about child identity theft, if you are dealing with a young person who has been the victim of identity theft, if the deaths were made when the person was under the age of 18, then they just have to show that they were a child at the time the deaths were made in order to basically get those debts off their credit report, because children by law do not have the capacity to contract, so they can't get debts in their name until they're over the age of legal majority in their state, which in most states is 18 for contract purposes. In some states it may be slightly different, so you'll want to check. But for the most part, if you're dealing with a kid and say a parent or someone they knew stole their identity or a stranger did, they can just show a proof that they were a child at the time in order to get things cleared off their credit report. They don't have to go through all the steps an adult would have to take to clear up identity theft. So this child identity theft brochure helps give that information and leads people to more information at identitytheft.gov. So I want to talk a little bit now about identitytheft.gov because it's a great tool for people of all ages to use if their information is stolen and misused. Identitytheft.gov is basically the federal government's one-stop center for identity theft victims. It helps you report identity theft to the Federal Trade Commission, and now you can also report tax-related identity theft to the IRS through identitytheft.gov. It also helps people recover from identity theft because it gives them personalized recovery plans based on their particular situation. So when they report the identity theft, the system looks at, is it medical identity theft? Is it child identity theft? Is it tax-related? Is it credit card-related? And then it feeds them detailed advice for that specific type of identity theft. So they don't just get cookie-cutter advice. They get just the advice they need for their specific information. and it'll give them links to how to place a fraud alert or how to get a credit freeze. It'll also give them letters that they can print out to send to creditors and to credit reporting agencies in order to clear up their credit. And it gives them an easy-to-print checklist that walks them through the steps to take in order to recover from identity theft. This slide here just shows you what the home screen looks like if you go to identitytheft.gov. This is what it will look like. And if you want the whole site in Spanish, in that upper right-hand corner, there's sort of a light blue-gray box, and that will click you over to the Spanish version of the site. The whole site is available in Spanish, and the letters are available in Spanish so that people can understand what they're sending, and then there's an English version to send to companies that may or may not be bilingual. So identitytheft.gov is a great tool, and it's a free tool, and people can use it to create an identity theft report, which can help them clear up their credit reports, which helps, like I said before, with that background check before they get a job. Now, another great tool that we have at the FTC is Consumer.gov. We try to make all of our materials very plain language and very simple, but this one really gets to the core of that. And we call it our Consumer Protection Basics, plain and simple, just what you need to know in streamlined messages. It's very action-oriented. It's broken down into 4 different sections, which you can see here: managing your money, credit, loans, and debt, and then scams and identity theft. And then there's a toolbox with other information. And if any of you teach financial education to use, that toolbox will have lesson plans and other information that you can use to teach some of these concepts. So just to give you an idea of what you'll get on Consumer.gov, this is a look at the Managing Your Money section, and we have great materials on making a budget that walk through. For each topic, we have sections on what it is, what to know, and what to do. So it goes over what's a budget and what you should know about budgeting, and how you should use that information. And for budgeting in particular, we have a really great interactive Make a Budget worksheet that is a great thing for anyone of any age to do, but especially for a young person. It can be a helpful tool to look at, does my income meet my expenses? And this can even be a projected income, thinking about, oh, I'd like to do this job, and I'd like to get this apartment. And will this job cover this apartment? Or if not, do I need to think about getting a cheaper apartment or getting a second job? It's a great way for young people to see visually whether their income and expenses are going to match up. And it even does the math for them if you feed it into this interactive worksheet, which makes it more appealing to a lot of people. Now, there's also a section on credit, loans, and debt with things like your credit history, using credit, payday loans and cash advances, car title loans, and managing debt. A lot of great resources for people. To give you an example of using credit, some of the things we talk about there are how to order your credit report at annualcreditreport.com, and reminding people that annualcreditreport.com is the legitimate place to get that credit report, and giving them the phone number as well. And then learning how to fix mistakes on a credit report, whether it's either through the normal dispute mechanisms or if you're an identity theft victim, through the additional protections you have to block information on your credit report. And then one thing that a lot of young people really want to know about is, well, what if I don't have any credit? How can I get credit? And how do I get credit without, getting involved in some scam or some awful deal with a really high interest rate? So we give advice and tips about, looking for low fees and long grace periods and a good annual percentage rate, and explain sort of what those mean so that young people can understand that. And again, we do have also lesson plans and other guides that make it more real, and we have modules on things like renting an apartment and buying a used car. So a lot of real practical advice for people starting out on their own. Now, the last substantive section of Consumer.gov is the scams and identity theft section. So it has a lot of the information that we've talked about in terms of avoiding and recovering from identity theft. It also has information about scams against immigrants and job scams and money wiring scams. So just to give you a glimpse of this section of Consumer.gov, job scams is one I pulled out because it's one that could really target this young adult population. It also actually, frankly, targets older adults too, who may be looking for extra income working from home. But some signs of a job scam that you can tell young people to be on the lookout for are, promises that you'll make lots of money working at home and offering a certificate to improve your chance of getting a job. Sometimes they even promise a government job. But the big thing to know in terms of avoiding these job scams is not to pay money to earn money, not to pay in advance for information about a job. A lot of these scams make you pay a relatively small fee, usually under $100, to sign up for some sort of program or membership, or to get the supplies that they say you'll need for this job opportunity. And they'll also, make up fake references of people who say they've made lots of money. So people should know not to pay money to earn money and not to deal with anyone who pressures you to act quickly. And really, it's a good idea to check any sort of business opportunity that's not with, a brick and mortar job, to check these types of business opportunities with the Better Business Bureau or your state attorney general, or even just do a search online with the name of the business opportunity plus the word scam or complaint. Those are good ways to find out if there are any huge red flags about the business opportunity that someone's looking at. Now, all these Consumer.gov materials you can order again at our bulk order site, Bulkorder.ftc.gov. They're all available for free in English and in Spanish, and we have a packet for teachers and educators to use that has all that information in one place. Now, you can use Consumer.gov in a variety of ways. You can link to it. You can also cut and paste information into newsletters or websites. If you have a website that youth look at or people working with youth look at. And then it also has audio read-alongs, so it's very good for lower literacy populations and for people who may have visual impairments. Everything on Consumer.gov has an audio read-along. And again, I mentioned the lesson plans, short presentations, and you can, of course, order the free printed materials from our bulk order site. And now I'm going to turn it back to my colleague Lisa Lake to talk about some other resources we have that may be helpful to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Lisa. All right. So as Lisa mentioned, so much of our materials are customizable. We can't stress that enough because we want to get the information out there. And just to dive a little bit deeper into Consumidor.gov, which is in Spanish, and the bulk order sites that offer materials, the publications in Spanish. These are screenshots of them, just so you'll know what they look like. I will share the websites with you later on in the presentation. But the information is really easy to gather. We have different categories for both of our sites, English and Spanish. And so you can go and easily find, like, by category, like, say, for instance, under money, spending money. You can go and get information about, like, how to shop for the right deals, how to avoid, how to identify when people are saying that things are made in America. Now, these are things that probably a lot of young people aren't going to care about, but whether or not things are made in America. But the other part of it is just how to get the best deal on spending your money. And then a lot of these issues may not, immediately affect them, but I assume that a lot of the kids that you work with, a lot of the young people you work with will need long-term counseling. So not just like when you get out and you have to get a job. They want to check their credit report to make sure no one's been using their social, but not just that immediate stuff that they need to get started, but then you kind of want to, you probably want to give them lessons for long-term and teach them about things earlier. So whether or not that's in English or Spanish, it's available for you here at these two sites. Now, just delving a little bit into Spanish, we have things, we wanted to make a lot of our materials very easy to read and interesting. So a few years ago, the people on our Spanish team, Spanish language team, came up with the idea of doing these booklets called fotonovelas. And they specifically target Spanish-speaking Latinos. There's 6 brochures in all here, 2 of them on government imposter scams and income scams. And so a lot of people, when they come out, there's no shortage of emails that come out like telling people, oh, you can make a lot of money doing stuff at home, or you can make a lot of money starting this business. And so that's what, the publication, that one of the publications that we're featuring here talks about. And then a lot of times kids might get, young people might get information about scholarships, government grants that will offer scholarships. And not all of that information is bad, but you have to really look at the source. And so booklets like these talk about those subjects and how they can identify them, but they do it in a way that tells a story. And we have found that folks love these materials, and we have gotten a few requests to back translate these into English, and we've honored those. And so if that's something that interests you, certainly send it in chat or send it to me, and I'll pass it on to our Spanish language team and see if we can make that happen for you, because it is a tremendously successful resource. Now, one of the things that's the heartbeat of the FTC, we can't really do our jobs unless we hear from consumers, from everyone. We have a mechanism set up to field every consumer complaint and to also send that out to law enforcement so they can be on the lookout and also collect data from what they're hearing and pass it on to us. But we want everyone who has the power in their state, as well as consumers individually, to know that they can let us know about scams. Now, what I should say is it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to get right on it. We're not like a one-to-one. We won't handle individual complaints or reports. We get an aggregate of those complaints, and eventually, if there is a trigger that investigates, that triggers us to investigate, we do that, and if that leads to a legal action, and then it proceeds, to there. But it's about the number and volume of complaints that we get that makes that happen. So if you know of a young person who got scammed, got told something about something that they bought and then it wasn't true, or they got told and paid for a job opportunity that turned out to be a lie, we've got to hear about that, because the chances are that person is doing that to a lot of people. So every complaint we get is critically important to our mission. And in many cases, it does lead to some type of action to try to stop it. And we most definitely put out consumer information education based on those complaints to let people know how to avoid them or what to do if they've been affected by them already. Okay, so some sites to remember. It's a great thing that this PowerPoint is going to be available to you offline. So I forgot to mention that I also coordinate our reentry efforts. And how that relates here is it's also entry. If I do, the work with the Departments of Correction and, probation officers, as well as, halfway houses and other agencies, public and private, who are committed to making sure that people who have done time in prison come out and they've got a good starting point and long-term point, to be successful and to avoid recidivism. So how this relates in my mind when we put this presentation together was, okay, so you have young people who are in the juvenile justice system, and you also have people who, have been in foster care or been in other situations where have been in crisis. So they're about to be adults, and we hand-selected, because we have a wealth of materials, as you'll find out when you explore our site, a wealth of materials, but we wanted to pull out the most important things on this reentry page. And so even though it says reentry, that may or may not apply to what you're doing with the young people you work with, but certainly go there because that kind of distills everything that we have available. We picked, a lot of the information that Lisa was talking about, I think all the topics about credit, identity theft, but we also added things like, okay, so you're going to want to buy a car. It's probably going to be a used car. How do you do that? Opening up a checking account. So the very basic life skill stuff that you want to know in addition to Consumer.gov information. Again, we can't stress the Bulkorder site enough. You can order anywhere from 10 to 10,000 or, probably beyond that of materials, and it doesn't matter. You don't get charged a dime for that. They're absolutely free, again, including the shipping. So please do take advantage of that. Lisa's already talked to you extensively about consumer. Actually, no, this is our general consumer page, and this is kind of where we have our blog posts and the information I shared with you earlier in the screenshots about the different categories that we have information in. The media site, though, is where if you're doing a class for a group of young people or if you're doing any type of presentation, we have a wealth of media materials, videos, and PSAs that can, help you do, very dynamic presentation and give you a discussion point on those. And so pretty much that's listed where you go to this site, and you can download those videos, and if you have problems with that, you can contact me, and I'll certainly help you through that process and see if we can burn copies on CD if that works better for you. I've done that for a number of agencies. We encourage you to subscribe to our blog. It offers a wealth of information on breaking cases, and so our articles are, we try to keep them up to date, the stuff that you'll get from our main Consumer.ftc.gov site. But these blog posts are really great because it tells you what is breaking news. It'll tell you, we just discovered the scam, we just sued this company for telling people, that they're going to get, they're going to make X number of dollars if they spend hundreds of dollars to get in this program, things like that. Actually, I just wrote a couple of blog posts on, small business type of things or independent, people who want to be independent or work at home for themselves and how they lied to consumers about what they can do. So anything that you want to know, I suggest you subscribe. You can take those blog posts, copy and paste them into any communication that you have, and, use them as your own. Again, you do not have to quote the FTC as the information is copyright free. And then finally, we keep doing it because it's important. Please do file complaints. You can do that on behalf of people. You don't have to tell a person, okay, you need to file a complaint. If you feel like you want to report, for someone else, someone has told you about something, they gave you details, and you want to report it on their behalf, you can certainly do that. So please take advantage of that. And we just want to thank you. Again, it's all about partnerships for the FTC. We, live and breathe for those. We work very hard to establish those because it's about getting the information out. And, we are certainly, Lisa and I, available to you to answer questions one-on-one, to work with you one-on-one for your programs. So please do take advantage of our contact information and contact us, obviously. And thank you.
All right.
Mr. William.
All right, great. Well, thank you very much for that very important information. Just as a reminder to our audience that if you have any questions, you can please type your questions in the chat pod as they arise. We did have a few questions to come up that we want to go over. So a participant did want to know a little bit about the written notification and the background check. Would the background check be a written notification in an EEOC announcement, or would it be specific to the individual applying for the job? They want to know if this would be done before or after the written notification, because they felt it was a little, I guess, unclear of the person who gets the notification afterwards. And so I believe, Lisa, cheerfully, that question may be posed to you. Would you like to provide any follow-up?
Sure. There are several different notices that people should get if a background check is being used. The first one is a standalone written notice to the applicant, so it would not just be something in a generic EEOC announcement. It needs to be something specifically given to the applicant in a separate standalone document, and then that's at the point that the employer is getting consent for the background check. So that's one notice, and then there's also a notice that's required, when an employer thinks that they might take an adverse action like denying employment based on the background check, and then a third notice when they actually do deny employment based on that background check. So there are three possible times for notice. Everyone should get that standalone written notice, though, before a background check is done, and then the other two would just come into play if something's done based on negative information on them. And then I also saw a question there that I wanted to address in terms of copyright information and the FTC's materials. As Lisa Lake said, none of our material is copyrighted. It's free and in the public domain, and that's designed so that other people can use it freely. But if you're concerned about whether it's up to date or not, you can look on the back of every print publication. We have a publication date as to when the publication was last updated. And at the bottom of each of the articles, it also has a date so that you can tell when it was last updated. So those are good ways to tell, but none of the information is copyrighted so that you can use it more readily.
Hey, thank you, Lisa. Thank you for addressing that. Another question came in regards to credit check. And so the question, I guess, is framed as employers doing a credit check. They want to know, I guess, the process of an employer doing a credit check, if this is legal or not.
Right, that's a good question. Yes, it is legal. That's one of the types of background checks. The term background check is kind of confusing because we're talking about possible criminal history check, possible credit check, and possible medical history check. So yes, checking someone's credit is legal. They do have to give notice before they do that, and they do have to give you a copy of it, of the actual credit check, if they take any adverse action based on it. So that's why we do advise people before they're looking for a job to check their credit themselves and clean up any mistakes in there, or if there are things that are not mistakes but are making their credit worse, to try to address those either by paying down some debts if they're able to, or closing out some accounts if they're able to.
Great. Thank you. And just as a reminder to our audience, a couple more minutes for questions, and so please type your question, if you have any, into the chat box. So we do have a particular question that just came in regards to applications and the indication of a person being convicted or not for a crime. I guess if the youth are not convicted in adult court, they want to know how that individual may be able to answer that question on an application.
Right, that's something that you're going to have to look at your particular state law, and also look at the actual, adjudication in terms of how the conviction was handled. A lot of times juvenile convictions are designed so that they don't go on someone's permanent record, or so that there's, you know, probation instead of an actual conviction on there. So you'll need to consult the state law. It varies from state to state, and also, you know, check that person's record beforehand to see what it looks like. And if you're not sure, you can check with your state attorney general for more guidance on that, because that's going to vary state by state.
Great. Thank you, Lisa Schifferle, for that answer. Again, for folks, if you'd like to ask a question to our presenters, please feel free to type your question into the chat box at this time. And we'll give people just a couple of more minutes to go ahead and ask questions that they may have for today's presentation.
While we're waiting,
And while
I did see another question. Oh, sorry. I was going to say, I saw a question in there about the FTC's complaint process, and just so people know, if they have trouble inputting information online on the complaint system at ftc.gov/complaint, they can call 1-877-FTC-HELP. But just to be clear, the FTC does not provide individual help in terms of these complaints. We do use these complaints to try to find scammers and shut them down on a global level. We also use them for consumer education purposes to track trends and address our consumer education, but we're not going to be able to provide individualized assistance to people. That's why Theft.gov walks people through the steps to take. We sometimes refer people to CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, if the issue deals with a credit reporting agency that is not doing what they are supposed to be doing.
Great.
And again, if
Thank
people
you.
are having trouble online, they can call the 877-FTC-HELP.
Great. Thank you. So we have about 8 minutes left in the presentation, and we have time for maybe a few more questions if anyone wanted to ask any questions. Again, just type your question to the presenters, and we will address them as they come in. Lisa Schifferle and Lisa Lake, while we have time and while we're waiting for some questions to come in, I wanted to ask or see if you all would maybe like to revisit some of the resources for some of our audience members as well. I know we have several, but if you all wanted to maybe highlight any additional resources that we've covered today, or maybe even would like to cover in the future.
Sure. Again, you know, going back to the website, the main website, there is a wealth of information. To answer that question in a slightly different way to begin, we can customize, just like we do on the reentry page, we can customize the information to fit whatever your immediate needs are. So if you feel that, you know, a lot of the young people that you serve are worried about background checks, as Lisa like very thoroughly explained, and they're also worried about how to report identity theft, or they're worried about their online safety. A lot of young people, you know, at a certain age are eligible, you know, to get online and to go to social media accounts. So we have information even about romance scams and wiring money, and, you know, what you should look for in other types of scams. So if there's a particular issue, chances are we've got an article to cover it. So instead of your sifting through all of that, you can call me or Lisa and get information specific to what your program needs are. So I mentioned romance scams is like, you know, another article resource that we have. Let me see. We've got like using credit wisely, renting an apartment, I think is another one that came up. We have, again, business opportunity scams, you know, privacy, a lot of information on privacy, not just identity theft, but like when you go on a social media site, you know, who you're sharing your information with and how to do your settings in such a way that you're not sharing stuff that you don't want to. Also, for Living Life Online, and that's actually an old publication that we have, we've got like just kind of social media one-on-one type of things in addition to, okay, make sure your privacy is, is tight when you go out there and you're not sharing personal information, account information. We also have, basic things about the internet. So in a publication called Etc., we designed that several years ago, and it's been updated about like a year or two ago, if I'm not mistaken, to talk about some of the other things that involve sexting and the other things that people might do on social media since it's evolved from that time. So even though these young people are a little bit older, the information is still valuable because it talks about terms that they or you or, other folks may not necessarily know about, like what I just used, sexting, or, spoofing and those types of things that kids and everyone really should watch out for. So that's etc.gov. And I am trying to think of others that actually might be relevant to this audience.
Well, Lisa, while you're contemplating that, I wondered if for the last minute we could take a quick shift, and I wanted to see if Lisa Schifferle could maybe talk maybe for about 60 seconds or less or so about the upcoming webinar that she'll be hosting next month for cyber safety for young adults, just to provide our audience a quick preview of that, and then we can end with you providing those resources that you're thinking of as well.
Sure. Well, as Lisa Lake said, we have a lot of materials about cyber safety for young adults, and so next month on the OJJDP webinar, we're going to be featuring a lot of that information in a webinar on cyber safety for young adults that my colleague Ari Lazarus and I will be doing. So it will cover information like top tips for cyber safety for young adults and also tips to protect themselves from identity theft online. It'll go over things about privacy settings on social media accounts and setting up your computer so that you have antivirus, anti-malware, and a whole host of other information for young adults about what they should share, what they shouldn't share, how they should set their privacy settings on different devices and in different apps so that they aren't sharing too much and so that they can be safe online. So that'll be May 14th from 2 to 3.
All right, great. Thank you. We have about 2 minutes left, so I can go ahead and wrap us up, but just let me check in with Lisa Schifferle and Lisa Lake. Are there any last-minute comments that you all have for our audience before we wrap up today's webinar?
Sure. I just want to say one more thing. I see someone's typing a question, so maybe we should just go there. The information be appropriate for re-entry population. Absolutely. That question's from Carol Brown. That's a great question, Carol. Yes, absolutely. I saw it at least as interchangeable. It's the same topic areas, I think, for people who are just coming into society and people who are coming back into society. So they're interchangeable. The information, by the way, is not directed, so it's not going to say, as a young person, you're just coming out into the world and this is what you should know. It's just the facts and just like explanations of the topic.
Great, wonderful. We have about a minute left, so ladies, if you wouldn't mind, I maybe like to go ahead and wrap us up. But great presentation today, and thank you all so much for this wonderful information provided. Great.
Thank you.
So, yes, it's been our pleasure. We really appreciate it. Wonderful content today being shared across the board, and we're getting applause coming in. That's great. Well, just a last minute just for everyone in regards to our upcoming webinar, May 14th. Remember that we have that. Don't forget you can contact NTTAC through the website displayed on this slide. You can stay up to date on the latest information by signing up for NTTAC's listserv. And also don't forget to check us out on Facebook at OJJDP TTA. Do you have a TTA need, or do you have a request? You can send in your request or submit one to OJJDP's TTA 360 platform. The link is displayed. Excuse me, sorry. Let me go back. Here we go. The link is displayed here if you would like to submit a request or need help. If you'd like to reach out to OJJDP, you can reach us through the help desk on the information displayed on this slide. Don't forget that we will have the webinar archived on NTTAC's YouTube channel, where you can also display past webinars. For the event transcript or even supporting materials, please contact OJJDP TTA Help Desk. Please take a moment to review this statement and disclaimer. And finally, we would appreciate if you could take about 5 minutes to complete the feedback evaluation. Again, thank you all for joining us today. Have a great afternoon.